3,096 days. Nearly 8.5 years. A mind-boggling amount of time for anything to last, let alone a speedrun world record. But one Mario Kart Double Dash speedrun reached this mark. A run so impressive, so incredibly unbeatable, that it transcended what was previously thought to be possible. This is Kouider's Bowser's Castle Flap. Bowser's Castle is an extremely difficult track, one of the hardest and longest in Mario Kart Double Dash. You have to dodge obstacles such as thwomps and fireballs, along with taking excruciatingly tight turns. This track is extremely difficult to master, but some Double Dash speedrunners were dead set on pushing the track to its max. In the game's early days, the track was dominated by a French player named Paul Regeff. He set a combined 40 world records across the course's 3-lap and flap categories. For the rest of the video, we'll be focused on the flap, aka fast lap category. For this category, you use both of your mushrooms in an effort to complete one lap as fast as possible. Through very choppy video footage, we can see that speedrunners quickly found the two fastest mushroom spots on this track, cutting off the tiny bit of grass on the last turn and on the spiral to try to make up for the lack of mini turbo boosts. At the beginning of 2005, Paul would set his final record on this track with a time of 45.443 seconds. This was the first ever Myth B time in the Fast Laps history. Quick side note, the MKDD players page has standards for times on all the tracks. These are goals for players to follow along with and try to beat. They go in order of beginner, intermediate, advanced, expert, hero, titan, myth, then god. Up to hero, the standards go from A through D, with A being the best and D being the worst. At titan and myth, there's an additional plus standard that is above the A through D standards. At God, the letters are completely scrapped, and it goes from God to God plus 1, God plus 2, all the way up to God plus 10. These standards are going to help us understand the importance of world records later in the video, so keep these in mind. Another French runner, Rafa64, would take back the world record a few months later, breaking the 45.4 milestone with a 60 millisecond world record improvement. The very next day, though, it would be a new player taking down the world record, German player Holy Moly. Yeah, that Holy Moly. Say what you want about a Super Mario 64 speedrun, but he was definitely a talented double dasher. He'd go to show that with a 45.284 lap, a 0.1 improvement over the previous world record. This was the first ever Myth A time and was a mere 5 milliseconds from the Myth Plus standard. This run was certainly very impressive, almost like he could play like Taz. Previously, the only two world records that had lasted even 100 days were Paul Regeff's last two records on the track. This run from Holy Moly lasted 380 days, over a year. It was becoming clear that this track was becoming more and more optimized, and getting a world record was only going to be even more of a challenge. Finally though, the world record was beaten by Dutch player Vincent van der Vloot. This was a solid 46 millisecond cut, finally getting the track down to Myth Plus. The god time was a sub 45.2, and that was definitely possible now. It wouldn't be Vincent to do it though, rather it was fellow Dutchie Aaron Langer. Just 4 days after Vincent's record, Aaron would cut nearly 0.1 with a time of 45.155, easily clearing the god standard. Then, just a few weeks later, another new runner would get his first record on the track, a 45.142 by Hendrik Bund. Hendrik is universally considered one of the best players in the game's history. He's a multi-time world champion and has set dozens of world records. He'd opt to continue playing the track, first improving to a .138, an extremely small cut but crossed the flap into God plus 1 territory. His next cut would be much bigger though, skipping to God plus 2 entirely for a God plus 3 time of 45.002. This track was now painstakingly close to going under 45 seconds. This was a massive time cut though, the largest cut on this track's world record since a Paul Regeff improvement in March 2004, and that was when this game had only been out for a few months. You see, this track's difficulty made setting a world record harder, but at the same time, due to the length of the track, if you made a minor enough mistake, you could make up for it by driving the rest of the course cleanly, so Hendrik's run certainly had room for improvement. Hendrik said he'd continue to play the track, and another top runner, Swedish player Carlson, was also playing the track. Who would get into the sub first? Despite playing the game for a few years afterwards, Hendrik never got a 44-second time, perhaps a testament to how difficult of a track this was to grind and improve on. That means that Carlson would net the first sub 45, getting a time of 44.962. It had taken him a few months, but he had done it. A few months later, he'd come back to the track again, this time getting an even better time of 44.906. This time was a God plus 4, 7 milliseconds off of the God plus 5. This was an extremely impressive time, and although there were a few slight errors, this was still an immaculate run, and one that would definitely be hard to beat. On April 12, 2010, Carlson's BC flap record had officially lasted for 1,000 days, making it the 17th MKDD world record to reach that mark. Beating this was clearly going to be a great challenge, but someone had to do it. So who was up for the task? At the beginning of 2009, a new French player would join the MKDD leaderboards by the name of Kouider Benariwa. He had a very solid timesheet. He debuted at number 43, which was definitely no easy feat. In early February, he got up to number 29, but then took a break for about a month. When he came back and finally submitted his times, he was up to number 20. At the end of April, he was at number 15. He wouldn't submit any more times until the end of July, but when he did, he'd submit 16 times, including his first ever world record that brought him up to 8th place. The next week, he'd set another world record and move up to 7th. Within just 8 months, a completely new player had clawed his way up to being the 7th best player in the world. It was clear that this guy was very good at Mario Kart Double Dash. He ended 2009 off at the number 6 spot, while possessing 3 world records, allowing him to earn the 2009 Player of the Year award. Getting this good at the game this quickly was something absolutely unprecedented, but although he had his doubters, he was certainly a legitimate player. He provided videos for his times, albeit not all of them, but you could clearly tell he was extremely skilled. He charged his mini-turbos extremely quickly and didn't hesitate to take corners as tight as he could. As early as September 2009, Kouider was posting extremely good Bowser's Castle times, where he implemented a new extra mini-turbo to get a time of 45.027. From the video of this run, we can see him quickly squeeze out an additional mini-turbo before this U-turn. Since mini-turbos are the main method of moving quickly in this game, if you can add in a new mini-turbo somewhere that doesn't severely impact your MT spacing or lines, it'll almost certainly save time. The average extra MT can save anywhere from 50 to 150 milliseconds, which doesn't sound like a lot, but keep in mind that most of the world records talked about in this video were beaten by less than that, so this was major. If Kouider could get a run identical or very close to Carlson's and implement this extra MT, it would very likely be a new world record. Kouider believed he could go for a 44-second time, and that's exactly what he'd do. It would be a minute before he played the track again, but in April 2010, he'd report a time of 45.020. Later that day, he'd improve his time again, this time with a much bigger cut, going down to 44.958. This made him the second player to go sub 45. It was clear that if anyone was going to take Carlson's record from him, it was gonna be Kouider. Kouider would take a month-and-a-half break from the track, but come back strong with a 44.943, a frame improvement. The next day, Kouider would report another improvement, and a pretty big one at that, 44.891. This time officially beat Carlson's world record, and was the first time a lap had been completed in under 44.9 seconds, eclipsing the standard for God plus 5. Funnily enough, Kouider was also grinding the 3-lap here and got world record there, and since both records were previously held by Carlson, this allowed Kouider to overtake Carlson in world record count. But Kouider wasn't done yet. He believed that the flap here could be better, so he kept playing Bowser's Castle, perhaps hoping for a standard upgrade. A few days later, on June 1st, he did get a standard upgrade. But it wasn't a God plus 6, or even a God plus 7. You see, from God up until God plus 5, there's a 60 millisecond time gap between standards. From then on, the gap shrinks a little to 40 milliseconds. If the standards went on forever, and every standard from then on out decreased by 40 milliseconds, then this run would be equivalent to a God plus 12. How was this even possible? A near 0.3 cut on the previous world record, something that hadn't been seen on this track since 2003? Completely skipping every standard after God plus 5 and going straight to God plus 10? Naturally, MKDD players worldwide were flabbergasted that such a time cut was even possible. Beating any world record, let alone a flap world record, by this much was unheard of at this point in the game's history. So how did he do it? Well, bad news. Unfortunately, this run, as with many other runs around this time, doesn't have video. Not everyone had access to a smartphone with recording capabilities, and capture cards were hard to come by. Don't let this deter from the legitimacy of this run, though. This run almost certifiably happened. Since the day Kouider joined the leaderboard, we've seen him improve rapidly into what was previously thought to be impossible. This run, if anything, just confirms his status as one of the most revolutionary players in the game's history. But what made this run so fast? Well, when asked about a video, Kouider said he used all the same strats as his other videos, so it wasn't a new strategy change that explained the time cut. Rather, he claimed that it was just a really good run. But what about this run made it over 0.4 faster than his video, and a clean 0.3 faster than the fastest video at the time? I asked former MKDD World Champion Optimistic Emo the same question, and he gave me a very comprehensive answer, which I'll try my best to sum up here. Looking at Kouider's 45.027, he first noticed some bounces on the beginning bridge. This bridge is pretty weird. It's designed as a super bumpy downhill slope, meaning that it's almost random how much you bounce or if you even bounce at all. Emo said reducing or preventing these bounces would probably save him a good 50 milliseconds. Emo also noticed that his spacing on the first thwomp section could be improved. Basically, when you release a mini turbo, you get its speed boost for 30 frames, or half a second. You want to try to get as many of these as possible to drive quickly, but you don't want to do them too quick, as starting a new drift completely resets the speed from a mini turbo. So you want to try to charge the next drift right as the 30 frame MT window ends. Obviously, it'd be impossible to drift after exactly 30 frames every time, but the closer you can get, the better. Emo estimated that with better spacing at the beginning, Kouider could save another 50 milliseconds. He mentioned that Kouider could have implemented an MT on the landing before the spiral, which would save about 0.1, but it's unlikely he would have implemented that, considering he mentioned he didn't do any new strats. One MT he could have reasonably implemented, though, was one on the balcony that Carlson had done in his video, but Kouider hadn't. This would save at least 0.1, depending on how optimally he did it. Emo estimated that he could have saved at least 50 milliseconds on the shortcut jump at the end, and another 50 milliseconds by not getting a small bounce when landing from the final ramp, which threw off Kouider's ending line in his 45.027. But so that totals up to 0.3 in time save, but that's still a tenth of a second from the 0.606. However, Emo did mention that since Bowser's Castle is extremely complex, even if it seems like you're doing the exact same thing as another run, you can gain or lose time unexpectedly. With no video, it's impossible to truly tell where his time save came from, but it seems as if that day, the odds were simply in his favor. As previously mentioned, this record sent shockwaves throughout the community. This run was a complete desecration of the Bowser's Castle flap leaderboards. Let's look at some statistics, shall we? First, this chart shows every world record from 2005 to 2010 and how big of a cut they were over the previous world record. Only one run even cracks the 0.1 mark, and then completely belittling all of them is Kouider. Alright, but let's take the focus off world records for a minute. At the time Kouider set his run, 27 people had to reach the myth standard or higher on Bowser's Castle flap. Here's all of them plotted. Only 11 of those 27 had earned the God standard. Here's all of those plotted. In both charts, you can see Kouider's run sticking out like a sore thumb. This run was an absolute outlier, and you can prove that statistically. R squared, or correlation coefficient squared, is a statistic used to determine how much correlation is present within a graph. The closer to R squared is to 1, the more correlation is present. If you take the plot of all the God times but remove Kouider's, you get an R squared of 0.91, signifying a very strong correlation. Put Kouider's time back in, and you're looking at an R squared of 0.682. The mere presence of Kouider's time completely decimates what is expected at the track's top level. This run was just on another planet, and we may never see anything like it ever again. Kouider would become the Mario Kart Double Dash World Champion in July of 2010, less than 2 months after his Bowser's Castle world record. He only held it for 3 days, before losing it again to Carlson, but Kouider would take it back less than a month later. This time, he would reign for 843 days, over 2 years. Kouider would suddenly stop playing the game in September 2012. He was still the world champion at the time, but he seemingly had no interest in defending his title. He didn't give any explanation or reasoning for why he stopped playing. He simply decided that his heart wasn't in it anymore and moved on to other games. Kouider only played for less than 4 years, but he definitely made the most of it. He went out on top, like a true champion would. On February 25th, 2013, Kouider's record officially reached the 1,000-day mark, the 24th world record to do so. On April 12th, it had lasted 1,046 days, officially overtaking Carlson's record for the longest lasting on the track. On November 22nd, 2015, it reached 2,000 days unbeaten, the 10th world record in the game's history to do so. On September 7th, 2017, it reached 2,655 days without being beaten, making it Kouider's longest lasting world record and the third longest lasting in MKDD history. On August 18th, 2018, it reached 3,000 days of still being unbeaten, just the second world record to ever do so. And just 21 days later, on September 8th, it became the longest lasting world record in Mario Kart Double Dash history. But someone had to beat it. And just like when it seemed like Kouider was the only one capable of beating Carlson over 8 years ago, there was only one player who seemed up to the task. And that player was Goomba and Al. Goomba was a rising star in the Double Dash world. He had joined the players page in August of 2015, and in a nearly similar fashion to Kouider, had began setting multiple world records within just a year. He improved dazzlingly fast, scoring world record after world record in the following years. He ascended to the title of world champion in March 2017, and still had that title come 2018. On November 22nd, he got the world record on Bowser's Castle 3-lap, putting him at 22 total world records. He played the track a bit more, but not to improve his time or anything, rather just for fun to cool off from the elation from his record. But that's when this happened.
Yeah, that's okay, that was fast, definitely. I know you wouldn't tell me where I maybe lost some time, but that was definitely good.
Holy, what? What?
Thanks for watching.